Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a great place to live, that build our communities. A lot of people work behind the scenes and we don't really know about them. Poets are people such as that. Every once in a while they come out and they read together and everyone realizes how much work has been going on in the dark or in someone's home. This year, we all met together at Slater Mill. Slater Mill welcomed Ocean State Poets, as well as music and dance from Brown University and dance from the Academy of the Arts in Providence. And we all met together to celebrate the lives of those who worked at the mills, to celebrate the lives of those who began the Industrial Revolution right at Slater Mill. It's a tour worth taking, and we highly recommend it. There are people there who will help you to learn more about the history of this tiny little state, and all of it was begun with the Industrial Revolution and Slater Mill. So I'd like to welcome some poets here today. It's not all of the poets who are part of this body, the Ocean State Poets, but I'd like to welcome you. Thank you for coming. We're working on a book together. I have the prototype here. The book will be on sale at some point in the future at Slater Mill, and it's basically about the people who worked and lived around Slater Mill. All of you have some experience with mills, and maybe you'd like to introduce yourselves and start with some of what you have learned about mills, because we all live with them. They're down the street from us. We work in them. We read about them. So they're kind of part of our thinking, but we don't really openly recognize them. Diana, why don't we start with you? What do you know about mills?
Well, I work in a mill, an old mill building. It's a dye house, as they called them, in Warren, Rhode Island. And so structurally, the building has not changed that much, and our space in particular, because we're artists, has maintained its original character. We also have another large factory, the Samsonite factory. So I find wandering around and looking at these buildings, I really admire the architecture of them and the work that I know went into inside them.
So they're still speaking to you.
Absolutely.
How about you, Marianne?
Juliana, my grandparents were mill workers, immigrants from England and Quebec. And my grandfather, at 14, came to apprentice in a very large mill in Pawtucket. Within 20 years, he was the mill superintendent. Just this morning, I'm driving south along the S-curve in Pawtucket, and they have just completed the demolition of this very, very large mill, million-square-foot mill, where my grandfather began his career at 14 years old, an uneducated boy, and ended as the mill superintendent.
I hope you get to put a plaque there at least in honor of him.
I'll go take a brick.
There you go. And Claire Robinson.
Well, I work at Rhode Island School of Design, so that's a school that was founded with money from the textile industry and still maintains a lot of those strong ties with those beginnings. But other than that, my husband's family is from here, and he's spent a lot of time working in and among the mill buildings. But I'm from Chicago, so it's been a wonderful piece of history to absorb and learn about.
It is amazing how you realize how much of Rhode Island is mills.
Yes, yeah.
Or mill communities.
Yeah.
Lenore, you have quite a history with mills.
I do. I'm from northern Rhode Island in Woonsocket, where there are still at least 80 mills existing. There was well over 200 at one time in the area. I come from a family where almost everyone started in the mill. They were scouted in Sherbrooke area, Trois-Rivières, places in Montreal, and they were brought down by hundreds of people that spoke French, and my grandparents were among them. My grandmother was a weaver, my grandfather was a weaver, and my grandmother was a spinner, and that's actually how they met, because they were mill workers.
So we all have some history. I have to say, I don't know what mine is. I live in Rhode Island. I love the mills. I think they're beautiful. But I have Kaub, Krug, Klein, all kinds of Wilson, Dornberg, Clemens in my background, so somebody worked in a mill. I'm positive of it. So anyway, I claim those people who I don't even know yet, but someday I'll do my own history and find out. Diana, you wrote a poem about Samuel Slater, excuse me. He was a poor person, poor farmer in England. He went to a mill because sometimes the children were taken to mills to work. And he was brilliant enough that he memorized that mill. And in 1789, he brought the design for that mill, the spinning mill, here to the United States. And as your husband says,
yeah, the biggest piece of intellectual property theft ever perpetrated.
the biggest piece of intellectual property theft ever perpetrated, and it really was. He was a traitor to Britain, and he was a gentleman and a scholar finally in the United States, where he finally owned 13 mills and was essentially a Bill Gates or a major contributor to society in New England. So Diana, you have put him into your poem. So I'd like you to begin. We're looking at 1789, 1795, that kind of time.
Okay. So I don't know if he would particularly appreciate how I put him into this poem, but I do admire a great deal of what he did from his perspective. But this poem is titled For the Children of Slater Mill. By 9 a.m. it was 80 degrees, the air coughing up wisps of cotton. A 6-year-old grabs a full bobbin, switches it for an empty. In and out his arm must go without knocking the spindle, like playing jackstraws, but the same hand thrown again and again. He scans the roving machine for a loose thread, for his next move. His eyes learn to think for themselves. Children everywhere, thin legs, small hands at work, agile as the machinery that pulls the cotton into strips, twisting strips into thread, whipping thread into tiny spools. A cat's cradle of tricky maneuvers that could snatch a finger. But not today. Today the thread has not torn, nothing has broken, no one has bled. Each bobbin is slipped off in time. The manager, just 12, keeps everything spinning like a top. Not one girl has cried. Not one boy will lose a dime in wages. This pleases Samuel Slater, watching from the door. No virtue like hard work and long hours. No longer does the sun crack the whip. Even in winter, they can willow out long evenings under the whale lamp. He thinks to himself how much he has done for these children, how he turned rough streams into ponds, how he jammed stone into stone, hammered beam to build an industry. It's as if he cast into the silk loops of spider webs, wove gold into the land's embroidery.
There's a lot of history in that. Maybe people don't know, maybe people have heard that children from farms were brought here. They were fed and clothed with company clothes. They were housed in dormitory rooms, and they came to the mills for 12 hours a day, some of them as young as 6 years old. And the youngest ones were the ones who had to come and walk between the different parts of the machinery, sometimes getting caught, which you're talking about in your poem. There is so much history here in what you've alluded to, and of Mr. Slater's success and his teaching the children. He decided they needed schooling, but they had maybe 3 hours a week, so they never could keep up with children who were allowed to keep going to school. And often they were ill by the end of the time that they would work. So 2 or 3 years as they developed, they would be breathing all of these fumes or these the fibers, and they would be ill.
Right.
And so you alluded to all of this, and I appreciate your poem. Thank you. Mary Ann, you have some poems about the early days of the mill as well.
I would like to read one which really picks up on the theme of the illness, and that was epidemic. Up from this period in 1800 all the way to 1910, when Rhode Island really took the national lead in public health reforms by addressing factory conditions to try to prevent the spread of TB, as well as influenza and other contagious disease linked to the factory work. My poem is called Kissing the Shuttle. Weavers had the highest TB rate of any cotton operative, and that was because they had the practice of kissing the shuttle, which was to use their mouths to thread the bobbins. This was nicknamed the kiss of death. And this method was outlawed in about 1911. Kissing the shuttle. The toll it took to spin the thread, to weave the cloth, that spewed the lint, that choked the lungs, that made the young weavers, women and girls, most susceptible to illnesses that would fell them. White lung, brown lung, TB, influenza, contagions they would spread. Weaving cotton, the air had to be moist, windows closed tight, floors kept wet. Steam pipes overhead sprayed the air, steaming the cotton and the girls, each tending 4 looms, refilling shuttles with fresh bobbins of thread by kissing the shuttle, lips pressed against the shuttle's eye, then sharply inhaling to pull the thread through, sucking lint and toxins into their lungs. 300 times a day, they'd share the shuttles, reuse the shuttles, kiss the shuttles, their mouths thick with the taste of what lodged in their lungs, lint, fibers, dirt, a glue called size, and chemicals if the thread was dyed. They'd cough the dirt up and start again. And not only that, these girls with ruined lungs coughing up cotton, lips bruised, teeth coming loose, were just girls. So they'd share lipstick, reapply it, after all that kissing left behind in the weaving room.
Thank you. You're welcome. Lenore, you have firsthand history in a way of mills, and you have something called the filibuster of industry. I wonder if you would read that, please.
Yes, this poem is really about the entire range of mills and the industry, and the fact that even though there were many negative things about it, we also have to consider that there was the positiveness of the entire institution. And there were many people in my family who said, well, we only made 10 cents an hour, but we lived and we made a lot of money, and it really fed 6 or 7 people at the time.
And so there was economic balance because of these mills, even though there was
suffering.
Sure. Tremendous suffering.
So the poem is called The Filibuster of Industry. As we enter this laborious place, this room of endless movement, where every hair's breadth is sacrifice, we ask ourselves which God has come to make all this as testament before us. For we came from a quieter place, where a breeze would be the only noise, from rolls across a languid hay that cast us as meager laborers among our animals and shelters. So far from here that excerpt is. Now, on such an expanse as this, in recompense, we have become the limbs that comb and card the very fur and skin the chosen Rheaume had rudimentally given. Here we make from this harried pattern a marvel of material, a fury of thread and bale that twists, wheedles, and spins in a frenzy of a whale as metal, wood, and straps manipulate with thrust, and the stomp of an army's clap renders clangorous among our weary state. It takes the shoulders of our men, the fingers of all our folk. We stand about and witness a length of string, spike, and spoke. We lose the use of any mental thought or converse keen to the glut and clomp of the rapid, riling glops of cramped, gridded, oiled machines. We are charged with rule over a tiny filament, For in every weave, each bobbin is key to make a fine covert and bias. All inserted strands must enter, all tensions must agree. We are just the level of ingredient that is measured into the flood, that the final drape of cloth will bear small samples of our blood that comes from the worn creases of our dirt and sweat-filled palms as we suffer the encroaching gusts of heat stuck as livestock in wretched barns. We have seen the end product of our line. We see it wrapped and packed and stored. We know it goes from here in its bland mass off to a dye house for its final cast, to become the product of our region as a branch of our assiduous nation. We came here for the opportunity to add to our own worth and care. We have within a proud devotion to our kin. Yet we know the station we are in among the clamor, catch, and gargantuan, that state before our miser menacing constructive power, beyond what any mortal can conceive. And yet we sense a cry of pride, to be included in this abide, to be the tiny soul in the machine, to be like cam or lever, somehow elevated by the sacred inevitable of a cinch in the fierce, terse filibuster of industry.
Thank you. You really emphasized the huge, huge impact of this industry, but then the one person in the middle of it and how that person becomes the cog, but is still the soul. And very, very interesting. Marianne, before we started, you were saying that you knew that women had eventually, in the 1800s, had done their own duty. They had taken care of themselves enough to start protesting.
We were talking about that, actually. Claire was talking about that with the first strike at Slater's Mill, 1834. The first organized strike in America, and it was women. Women walked out, yes.
I would like to read a poem about that.
Beautiful.
We're 2,800 women. Together, we build a factory, you build a factory, we'll make it run. Call us operatives. No names, no trace for history, but measure our output, yards and pounds and skeins. Keep us working, living, eating, shopping. Give us a little cash pay, some time off, but not much. Don't make us hussies, you will hear talk. Not too loud. We rethink innocence. We leave the family, find friends, leave ways of life, familiar streets, leave grandmothers, listen to them in 1 or 2 years, our senior. Save for marriage. Save and send it back. Want more and more, harder, longer. Save and save, hoping. City life, loud at first, confusing at first. Lectures, entertainment, sweets, styles, modern ways. Leave farming, this small-minded life behind, that old-fashioned life with no modern life. What could we do? We were opening bales, carding, spinning, dressing warp yarn, weaving cloth, $68 million worth of cloth in New England alone, ready to work. Now it's girls for girls, women speaking for women. Stand out, proud of our work, debating. We're learning, we're changing. Why can't they understand? We're speaking for wages, for housing, wages to pay for the family back home. We may be girls, but we have our demands. There is nothing we can't do. Our backs are strong. Daughters, granddaughters of revolutionary men. Hear our voices. We give life to the city, goods to the markets. We care for our future. We care for ourselves. We're changing cities, towns, changing women, changing lives, changing opinion, changing men's votes. Operative, they call us, daughters of colonialists. Listen to us talk. Mary Ann, you have a poem called Lords of the Loom, Lords of the Lash. I wonder if you would read that.
Certainly will. There was another epidemic associated with the rise of the textile mills in New England, and that was really a social epidemic called slavery. And this references Lords of the Loom, Lords of the Lash, an unholy union. The beatings, the cleaning of flax and cotton, the carding engine, boards with teeth moving in opposite directions, the pulling of cotton through teeth to comb it, to groom the fibers for spinning into yarn, stretching, twisting, spinning yarn into thread, wound onto spools, then unwound again to make the warp. The weaving of the cloth, the bringing together of warp and weft, the weaving, the unweaving, the unweaving. The Civil War threatens good slave-grown Southern cotton and cotton fever, hunger for calico and profit raging in the North. For King Cotton and unholy union forms, fleshmongers and planters of the South, textile magnates of the North, mill owners, fleshmongers, the lords of the loom and the lords of the lash, the engine of freight and cash, feeding the country's insatiable need for printed cloth, printed money. Like a train, like hounds in pursuit, this mill machine and field army, once set in motion, will never be stopped nor abolished, vow the lords of the loom and the lords of the lash.
Really important connection to make. Thank you. We'll learn more about slavery and more about the ways that all of these businesses are so interconnected, even though we think in the North we're free from that blight. Claire, you haven't said anything because your poems are mainly about a later time, but I'm wondering if you would you read your poem called Filler. Please.
Yes. So
tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. I think one of the great things about doing the reading was that I don't write a lot of historic poetry, and it really forced me to try and inhabit that reality and know that in a different way. So that was really valuable to me as a writer. It was a completely different experience of history. Filler is a term, it's a weaving term, and it's the material across the warp threads, which is the same as the weft or the loop. Filler. Every day I was a form, a jagged outline filled with breath and sweat. My hand wore smudges in the air, worn down the light around me, worn by machines, a fleshly dress or appendage made to aid the cloth. Sometime I wondered it did not spin my vein blue-red as I fed it like the maws of my babes, their always angry eyes, burning down, sad and solemn, and left. If I were wire, harder, I could have moved with the swift fury of those spinners. I would have tumbled away from all this work like so much cloth, that wide and white and clean. Seamlessly, I would do the wearing. My relief rising like steam, I would clatter as loudly as any machine, I would deafen.
And you have another one called We Move the Machines for Robinson Men. So you're saying for your family.
Yes, so this is a poem that is based on an experience that my husband had. He was working with his father doing crane work in a mill. Actually, can I? Thank you. I'm realizing I'm missing the second page here. We move the machines. Inside the mill, circa 1872, full of worn-out, dust-infested machines where women worked amid stale air, making elastic thread. We are here, figuring out the scene. It is all about rigging, methodical execution to avoid something crashing down, someone crushed, or losing a limb, the way some mill women did to the machines. A man in an expensive car waits for us to shepherd these looms into containers bound for factories in India or Peru. The world still wants affordable thread. Despite where it is shipped from, it will arrive as always. Almost everything here is an antique. The beams, the gantry, the creaking floors complaining in the manner of old men. No matter, they still fulfill their duties, the way thin blood continues its travels around an ailing body, or geese return to the city's edge to peck at asphalt where a sedgy pond once was. just do their job the way we do, lifting these ancient monsters onto beams and dollies and pushing them across space to the gantry. In the air, they almost look graceful and good, giant steel sparrows caught in straps, more than useful wings. Their greasy metal sides are cut across by shafts of light and shine. They are transformed, suspended and stripped of everything except how they hang here, oversized technological instruments, weightlessly stunning. I think I understand what it is to be shaped by unknown forces for some narrow reason, to work for ages, sometimes maiming those you were meant to help, until one moment you are launched out, your eyes full of dazzle above that world which enclosed you, and your breath catches in your throat, but still you know, sometime soon you will be set down again, to get back to the small thing you do so well, without tiring, without complaint.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Bill Carpenter, our famous cameraman, is also a poet from State Poets, and he has written 2 poems about abandoned mills. We can only have one because we only have 1 minute left. But Bill, if you would read your poem about abandoned mills. This is now. We've skipped a lot of history. We have a lot to say, but we're going to end with the present.
Okay. Abandoned mills. A few decades back, paddling in Quinnipiac, I docked my canoe to explore an abandoned mill. Its second floor collapsing from heavy machinery, half sunk through the overhead ceiling like unimaginably dense storm clouds in a falling sky. In a comptroller's office, a dusty museum, fitted with wooden shelves and metal desks, poised for the return of clerks. On a crumbling wall hung a calendar sporting a jazz-age flapper announcing the date, October 1929.
Thank you, and that's a good way to end. We all have mills around us. We should all be exploring them and taking pictures of them and valuing them for the fabulous history that is part of all of our families. Thank you, poets, for being here. I hope we do this again, and please keep writing. Thank you for watching Good News Rhode Island, and we hope that there are mills and important histories right around the corner from you, and you're going to bring them out into the open and talk about them. Thank you.